A group of rowdy bikers pulls into a gas station, their loud engines and even louder voices shattering the peace. They notice a man dressed in an unusual, Viking-inspired outfit filling his tank. Amused and looking for trouble, they begin mocking him. What starts as harmless jeering quickly escalates when the Viking calmly responds, revealing a strength and skill that leaves everyone, including the bikers, shaken. The gas station sat quietly on the edge of a rural highway, its neon lights flickering in the encroaching twilight. The hum of a distant motorcycle grew louder, and soon, a gang of bikers roared into the parking lot, their engines drowning out the stillness. The riders parked their bikes in a chaotic line, laughing and shouting as they dismounted. Amid the commotion, one of the bikers, a burly man with a leather vest covered in patches, noticed someone unusual at one of the pumps. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in what looked like Viking-inspired attire. His long hair was tied back, and a braided beard framed his stern face. The intricate designs on his leather belt and bracers gleamed in the fading light. "Hey, check out the cosplay guy," the biker shouted, pointing toward the man. The rest of the gang turned to look, their laughter escalating. "Is there a Renaissance fair in town we didn't know about?" another jeered. The man at the pump didn't respond. He continued refueling his vehicle, a large, rugged SUV that seemed to match his imposing presence. His calm demeanor only fueled the bikers' amusement. One of them approached, swaggering with exaggerated confidence. "Hey, Thor, where's your hammer, or are you out here looking for your longboat?" The man finally turned his head, his piercing gaze meeting the bikers. His expression was unreadable, neither irritated nor amused. "I'm just passing through," he said simply, his voice deep and steady. The biker smirked, emboldened by the lack of aggression. "Passing through? Not until you give us a good laugh, big guy." Another biker joined in, circling closer. "What's the deal, huh? You got a LARPing session later, or is this your everyday look?" The man returned to his task, ignoring the escalating taunts. His silence only seemed to provoke the group further. One by one, they began to gather around him, their laughter fading into something more threatening. "What's the matter? Too good to talk to us?" the burly biker asked, stepping into the man's space. The Viking looked up, his expression as calm as ever. "I'd advise you to let me finish," he said quietly. "You don't want to escalate this." The words hung in the air, a subtle warning that only made the bikers exchange amused glances. They had no idea what they were getting into. The bikers circled closer, their laughter echoing through the quiet gas station. The tall man at the pump remained calm, finishing his refueling as if he were completely unbothered by the growing tension around him. But his measured movements and unwavering silence only seemed to embolden his antagonists. "Come on, Viking guy," one of the bikers sneered, stepping forward with a smirk. "Show us a battle cry or something. Let's see if you're as tough as you look." Another biker chimed in, his voice dripping with mockery. "Yeah, tell us a tale of glory from Valhalla. You know, before you go back to your Comic-Con booth." The group erupted in laughter, their taunts becoming louder and more pointed. A few of them began to mimic sword fighting, swinging imaginary weapons in exaggerated movements. One biker even pulled out a pocket knife, flipping it open dramatically as he gestured toward the man. "You gonna defend your honor, or are you just gonna stand there?" the burly biker said, leaning closer. The man turned slowly, his sharp blue eyes cutting through the air like steel. For the first time he spoke, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. "You've made your point. Now step back and let me leave." The bikers froze momentarily, caught off guard by his composure, but the silence was short-lived. The burly biker scoffed, rolling his shoulders as he squared up. "Let you leave? Not until you show us a little Viking spirit." The others laughed and shouted their encouragement. "Yeah, let's see what you've got." The man sighed, placing the gas nozzle back on the pump and capping his tank. "I'm warning you," he said, his voice firm but even. "This is your last chance to walk away." The bikers exchanged amused glances, mistaking his words for weakness. One of them, a wiry man with a scraggly beard, reached out and shoved the Viking's shoulder. "Or what?" the wiry biker challenged, his grin wide. The tall man didn't react immediately. Instead, he stood still, letting the moment hang in the air. Then, with a subtle shift in his stance, he locked eyes with the burly biker and spoke again, this time with a quiet authority that sent a chill through the group. "You'll regret finding out." The bikers laughed, their bravado filling the gas station parking lot. The burly leader cracked his knuckles, grinning as he stepped even closer to the man. "You're full of talk, big guy. Let's see if you've got anything to back it up." The Viking, still calm, raised his hands slightly, palms out. "I don't want trouble," he said, his tone low but firm. "But I won't stand down if you push me." "Push you?" the wiry biker scoffed. "You're outnumbered, Thor. What are you gonna do? Summon lightning?" The laughter rippled again, but it faltered as the burly leader took the first swing. His punch aimed straight for the Viking's jaw, but the man moved with surprising speed, sidestepping effortlessly. The biker stumbled forward, caught off balance as the Viking grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back in one fluid motion. The burly man cried out, dropping to his knees. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, the Viking released him with a slight shove, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. The other bikers froze, their amusement replaced with confusion. "You don't want to do this," the Viking warned, his voice calm but with a steel edge. But the wiry biker wasn't ready to back down. He lunged forward with his pocket knife, aiming for the Viking's side. In a flash, the Viking stepped into the attack, grabbing the biker's wrist and twisting it sharply. The knife clattered to the ground as the wiry man yelped in pain. Gasps erupted from the small group of onlookers who had started to gather near the pumps. A man with a phone whispered, "Are you seeing this?" as he began recording. The Viking kicked the knife aside and released the wiry biker, who stumbled backward into his comrades. "Enough," the Viking said, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado shaken. "Get him!" one of them shouted, and two more lunged at the Viking simultaneously. With the precision of a seasoned warrior, the Viking stepped into their path. He deflected one with a swift kick to the knee, sending the man crumpling to the ground, and used his elbow to strike the other squarely in the chest. Both bikers fell, gasping for air. The remaining bikers hesitated, their confidence evaporating as they realized this was no ordinary man. "Who the hell are you?" one of them demanded, his voice shaking. The Viking stood tall, his gaze steady. "Someone you shouldn't have crossed," he replied. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the muffled groans of the bikers sprawled on the pavement. The Viking adjusted his stance, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the glow of the gas station's lights. He remained calm, but there was an unmistakable intensity in his gaze, a warning to anyone foolish enough to challenge him further. The burly leader struggled to his feet, his pride bruised more than his body. "You think you're tough?" he snarled, spitting blood onto the pavement. "We'll show you what happens when you mess with us." He gestured to the remaining bikers, who hesitated only a moment before charging as a group. The Viking stood his ground, his movements deliberate and controlled. The first biker swung wildly, only to have his fist caught mid-air. With a single twist, the Viking sent him spinning to the ground. Another lunged from behind, aiming to tackle him, but the Viking spun, driving his knee into the biker's stomach with precision. The man collapsed, gasping for air. The crowd of onlookers had grown, their murmurs growing louder. Phones were raised, capturing every moment of the scene. "This guy's a machine," someone whispered. One of the remaining bikers grabbed a tire iron from his bike, swinging it like a bat. The Viking dodged with ease, the weapon missing him by inches. In a seamless motion, he grabbed the biker's wrist, disarmed him, and tossed the tire iron aside. "Enough," the Viking said again, his voice carrying over the chaos. But the burly leader wasn't done. He grabbed a metal chain from his saddlebag, wrapping it around his fists. "I don't care who you are," he growled. You're going down. The Viking tilted his head slightly, as if assessing the situation. Then, for the first time, he smiled. A faint, almost imperceptible curve of his lips. The leader charged, swinging the chain wildly. The Viking stepped aside at the last second, grabbing the chain mid-swing and yanking it free with a single powerful motion. The leader stumbled forward, his momentum carrying him to the ground. The Viking dropped the chain at his feet, his voice calm but commanding. "Walk away. Now." The bikers, battered and humiliated, exchanged uneasy glances. Their leader groaned as he tried to push himself up, only to collapse back onto the pavement. "You don't know who you're dealing with," one of the bikers muttered, his bravado finally giving way to fear. The Viking met his gaze, his eyes cold but steady. "And now you never will." The gas station parking lot was eerily quiet. The Viking stood in the center, his towering figure commanding the attention of every eye. Around him, the bikers nursed their injuries, their earlier bravado reduced to hushed curses and pained groans. He stepped back toward his vehicle, brushing off dust from his leather bracers. His calm was unsettling, like a storm that had passed but still lingered on the horizon. The crowd of onlookers kept their distance, phones still raised as they recorded every moment. The Viking opened his SUV's door, reaching inside for a water bottle. As he drank, his sharp eyes scanned the parking lot, watching the bikers regroup near their motorcycles. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone kept them in check. The burly leader finally stood, using his bike for support. His face was red with anger and embarrassment, his lips swollen from the earlier fight. "You think this is over?" he spat, glaring at the Viking. One of the younger bikers grabbed his arm. "Boss, maybe we should just let it go. This guy isn't normal." But the leader shook him off. "We don't back down ever," he growled. The Viking set down his water bottle and turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "You've already lost. Don't make it worse." The leader's fists clenched, but his confidence wavered under the Viking's piercing gaze. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" he said, trying to muster authority. "I think I gave you a chance to walk away," the Viking replied evenly. "Take it before it's too late." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty to their leader wavering in the face of their humiliation. Still, none of them moved, waiting for someone else to make the first decision. The Viking sighed, stepping toward his vehicle. "If you won't take the chance, then what happens next is on you," he said. His calmness only added to the tension, leaving the bikers unsure of whether they should retreat or fight again. The leader, however, wasn't ready to let it end. "Get the weapons," he ordered, his voice trembling with anger. The Viking paused, his eyes narrowing. It was clear they hadn't learned their lesson, but if they wanted to continue, he would be ready. The atmosphere thickened as the bikers began pulling weapons from their saddlebags, tire irons, chains, even a crowbar. The crowd of onlookers gasped audibly, a few stepping back toward their cars as the situation escalated. The Viking, still calm, watched them with a measured gaze. He reached into his SUV and retrieved something from the back seat. When he turned, the collective murmur of the crowd rose to a stunned crescendo. In his hands was an axe, modernized, yet unmistakably inspired by the ancient weaponry of Norse warriors. Its gleaming steel blade caught the light, the intricate carvings along its surface glinting like runes of old. The handle was reinforced with a sturdy grip, designed for power and precision. The bikers hesitated, their confidence faltering as they stared at the weapon. "What the hell is that?" one of them muttered, his voice shaking. The Viking stepped forward, holding the axe at his side. "This," he said, his voice low and steady, "is your last warning." The burly leader gritted his teeth, gripping a chain tightly in his hands. "You think we're scared of a cosplay toy?" he barked, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "Then come find out," the Viking replied, his gaze unwavering. The leader roared in anger, swinging the chain wildly as he charged. The Viking moved with calculated precision, sidestepping the attack and raising the axe in one smooth motion. With a loud clang, the axe's flat side struck the chain, sending it flying out of the leader's hands. The leader stumbled backward, falling to the ground with a thud. The other bikers froze, their weapons halfway raised as they processed what had just happened. The Viking planted the axe firmly on the ground, leaning on it as if it were a staff. "You brought this upon yourselves," he said. "Now, leave before someone gets hurt." The bikers exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence shattered. The sight of the weapon, combined with the Viking's unshakable composure, was enough to make even the boldest among them reconsider. One by one, they began to back away, their bravado replaced by silent fear. The burly leader, still on the ground, glared up at the Viking. "This isn't over," he growled. "For your sake," the Viking said, his voice like thunder. "Let's hope it is." The burly leader remained on the ground, glaring up at the Viking as his crew hesitated around him. The weight of their humiliation was palpable, but their leader's stubborn pride refused to let the confrontation end. He pushed himself up, his knuckles white as he gripped the handlebars of his bike for support. "You think you've won because you've got a shiny toy and a few fancy moves?" he spat, his voice trembling with anger. "Let's see how you do one-on-one. Just you and me." The other bikers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to back him or try to dissuade him. One of them muttered, "Boss, maybe we should let this go." "Shut it," the leader snapped. "This guy isn't invincible." The Viking tilted his head slightly, regarding the man with an expression that was more pity than hostility. He slowly stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, and placed the axe gently on the ground behind him. "If it's a fight you want, then let's finish this," he said evenly. The leader grinned, though it was clear he was masking his fear. He raised his fists, bouncing slightly on his feet as if to intimidate the Viking. The crowd of onlookers murmured in anticipation, their phones held high to capture every second. The Viking didn't adopt a fighting stance. He simply stood there, arms loose at his sides, watching his opponent with an unwavering gaze. "Make your move," he said. The leader lunged forward, throwing a wild punch aimed at the Viking's jaw. But before it could land, the Viking sidestepped smoothly, catching the man's arm and twisting it behind his back in one swift motion. A pained cry escaped the leader's lips as he was forced to his knees. "This isn't about winning," the Viking said, his voice low but commanding. "It's about knowing when you've lost." With a firm but careful shove, he released the leader, who collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath. The other bikers froze, their eyes wide as they realized they were outmatched in every way. The Viking turned, picked up his axe, and slung it across his back. "It's over," he said simply. "Go home." The leader of the bikers remained on the ground, clutching his shoulder and breathing heavily. His crew stood frozen, their earlier bravado replaced by a palpable mix of fear and awe. The Viking adjusted the axe on his back, his calm demeanor unchanged despite the confrontation. One of the younger bikers stepped forward cautiously. His hands were raised in a gesture of surrender, and his voice was low. "Look, man, we didn't know who we were dealing with. We were just messing around. We didn't mean for it to get this far." The Viking regarded him for a moment, his piercing blue eyes seeming to weigh the sincerity of the words. "It's not about me," he said finally. "It's about knowing when to respect someone and when to walk away." The younger biker nodded, glancing back at the others. "He's right," he muttered, though his words carried enough weight to break the group's silence. One by one, the bikers lowered their makeshift weapons, dropping chains and tire irons onto the ground. The burly leader struggled to his feet, his pride visibly wounded. He glanced around at his crew, his jaw tightening when he realized their will to fight was gone. He turned back to the Viking, his gaze filled with defiance. "This isn't how we do things," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier venom. "No," the Viking replied, "but maybe it's time for change." The crowd of onlookers murmured, their phones still recording as the scene unfolded. A man near the front of the group called out, "You should listen to him. He just spared you more embarrassment than you already earned." The leader shot the man a glare but didn't respond. Instead, he took a shaky step toward the Viking, his hand outstretched. "I don't know who you are," he said grudgingly, "but you've made your point." The Viking hesitated, then took the man's hand in a firm grip. "Good," he said. "Now show them you've learned it." The leader nodded, retreating back toward his bike. The others followed, moving with the careful steps of men who had narrowly avoided disaster. The Viking watched them for a moment before turning back to his SUV, his focus already shifting back to the journey ahead. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles and rumbled away into the distance, the crowd of onlookers began to stir. A hushed awe filled the air, quickly replaced by a rising tide of whispers and excited conversations. Phones were still aimed at the Viking as he returned to his SUV, his towering figure and calm demeanor making him seem larger than life. A young man with a phone in hand turned to his friend. "Did you see that? This guy's like something out of a movie. I got the whole thing on video." His friend nodded, his eyes wide. "Who even is he? He just took on that entire group like it was nothing." An older woman, standing nearby with her arms crossed, chimed in. "He didn't just fight them. He taught them a lesson. That's what makes him different." The Viking opened the driver's door of his SUV and set his axe carefully inside, moving with the same calm precision he had maintained throughout the encounter. Someone in the crowd called out, "Hey, are you a professional fighter or something?" He glanced over his shoulder, his piercing eyes sweeping the group. "No," he said simply. "I'm just someone who knows when to stand his ground." The murmurs grew louder and another voice piped up. "That axe, is it real? Are you like some kind of Viking reenactor?" The Viking didn't answer, instead closing the door and walking around to check the pump. His silence only added to the mystery, fueling speculation among the onlookers. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap shook his head in admiration. "I don't know where this guy came from, but he's got the kind of presence you don't forget." The young man holding the phone grinned. "This is definitely going viral. Everyone's going to be talking about the Viking guy." As the Viking climbed into his vehicle, the crowd began to disperse, though their conversations lingered. Some debated his identity. Was he a martial arts expert? A soldier? A lone drifter with a story no one would ever know? The truth didn't matter to them as much as the impression he left. For everyone who had witnessed the scene, it was clear that the Viking wasn't just a man. He was a symbol of strength, control, and respect. With a rumble of the engine, the SUV pulled out of the station and disappeared down the highway. The crowd remained, their minds buzzing with the story they would retell for years to come. The gas station returned to a tentative calm as the Viking's SUV disappeared down the highway, its taillights fading into the distance. For a moment, the crowd of onlookers lingered, as though reluctant to let go of the scene they had just witnessed. "That guy was something else," a man muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "I mean, who walks around with an axe like that and backs it up like he did?" A woman nearby nodded. "It's not just the axe, it's the way he handled himself. Calm, controlled, like he knew exactly how far to go." Someone laughed nervously. "I bet those bikers are regretting their life choices right about now." The murmurs of agreement were punctuated by snippets of speculation. "Maybe he's ex-military," one person suggested. "You don't move like that without serious training." Another voice chimed in. "Or maybe he's just a modern-day Viking. Who knows?" Meanwhile, the bikers had regrouped at a nearby rest stop. Their leader sat slumped against his motorcycle, his face dark with anger and humiliation. "We never speak of this again," he growled, glaring at his crew. "Got it?" The others nodded silently, their usual bravado completely deflated. The leader glanced down the road where the Viking had vanished and muttered under his breath, "Who the hell was that guy?" Back at the gas station, the onlookers began to disperse, though their excitement lingered. A young man with a phone clutched in his hand grinned at his friend. "This is gonna blow up online. Viking versus bikers. It's like something out of a legend." The older woman from earlier smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Maybe that's exactly what it was," she said softly. "A modern legend. A reminder that strength doesn't always mean violence." The man beside her chuckled. "Well, if he's a legend, he's a damn good one. He handled those guys without breaking a sweat." As the last of the crowd trickled away, the gas station fell silent once more, its ordinary hum of activity resuming. But for those who had witnessed the confrontation, the Vikings' presence left an indelible mark, a story they would carry with them, embellish and retell countless times. For the Viking himself, the encounter was already behind him. Driving into the twilight, his thoughts were calm, his purpose clear. The axe, now resting securely beside him, was more than a weapon. It was a symbol, a reminder of who he was and the strength he carried, both in his body and in his resolve. And as the highway stretched out before him, the Viking became part of the endless road, a figure of quiet power, leaving behind only the echoes of a tale that would grow larger with every retelling.